In this video I'm going to show you how I turn this slab of wood into my one-of-a-kind coffee table, but it didn't come without its drawbacks though. It's just not my day. The slab I'm going to be using is this live edge British burr elm, and this cost me almost £440. This was not a cheap slab to get, but that's because the whole slab is burr. If you don't know what burr is, it's those weird abnormal growths or tumour-like things that you see on trees. They don't normally get that big, but in this case they've cut it in a way where it's actually the whole slab is just burr. It's pretty hard to come by, hence why it costs so much, but you get some insane figure and pattern in it. Now originally the plan was I was going to make this table for a computer desk for one of my friends. I don't have room for any more furniture in my house, but I still wanted to build something, so I offered to make him a table free of charge. Well, tell a lie, I actually said I'd build it for him for a copy of Battlefield 6 for the PC. The slab, although very pretty, it did show signs that it was starting to rot, and you can actually see that where it turns white and the rest of the slab is brown. So to get rid of the bulk of it, I used a chisel and then cleaned it up nicely with a nylon wire wheel. The original plan was I was going to make this for my friend for a PC desk, but it turns out this slab just was not big enough for what he wanted. We both spoke about it and we agreed that the only way we're going to make this big enough was to have a massive resin river, and that would have completely thrown off the wood to resin ratio. So we just agreed that we'll cut our losses and I'll just make myself a coffee table with it instead. Unfortunately for my friend, he'd already given me the code for Battlefield 6.
On and scammer gets scammed, buddy. That's what you get. You're not getting our guns back. No. Whoa.
Sorry bro, no takesies backsies. The cool thing about working with burr is that it's got such a nice live edge to it. It's got that bubbly island-like edge to it, which is going to look so cool with translucent resin. But I didn't want to make the same mistake I made last time, being that 2 of the 8 inserts I put into the table ended up going into the resin. So I made sure to design it this time where I had no inserts in the resin at all. As with all my tables, the moulds are about as rudimentary as you can get. I don't use any of them fancy plastic sheets, I don't use MDF with mould release or waxes. I just get a piece of OSB, slap a whole bunch of resin tape over it, and then use stud walling for the sides. And you'll be surprised how effective this actually works. And for a whole mould, you're probably only looking around maybe £5 or about £10 at max. So it is pretty cost efficient. Although this slab is absolutely beautiful, it was in the stages of spalting and also rot. So I pre-sealed not just the edges but the whole slab, and 2 reasons that's good for. 1, it's going to stop the air bubbles coming out of them sides when the resin begins to cure, and 2, it's actually going to harden up some of them rotten patches so it's actually workable when I go to sand it. I'm using Glasscast 50 Plus for this table, which is the go-to brand that I use for all my resin projects. This can go up to about 50mm thick, which is kind of the normal average for resins nowadays. But I've got to that point now where it's just too much of a risk for me to try another resin, so I just stick to what I know. I said this in my last video, but I'll say it again. If you are doing translucent tables, always take note on how much pigments that you're using per bucket or per litre of resin. And then that way, if you ever need to top it up or make another bucket, you at least know roughly what that formula is to get that same shade of black. Also, get yourself a good degassing chamber. I bought this one off Amazon, which is surprisingly a lot cheaper than you probably will think. I think this is about £160 I paid for this, but if you're going to be doing translucent tables or even clear tables, this is almost essential because that is going to help reduce all of them bubbles. I waited a couple of weeks to get out the mould, and I used my router sled to do the old usual, make a lot of noise and make a lot of mess, because I love all of my neighbours. Once the first side had been flattened, I then pried it off the mould, flipped it over and secured it back in place with some wood battens. And I remember doing this and it was absolutely freezing outside. I think it was maybe -6 in the UK at the time of filming this, and the weather was hitting all kinds of new records, whereas like 2 months in a row where it's rained every single day. Yeah, welcome to the UK, folks. If I don't upload videos after a few months, you can pretty much guarantee that that's the reason why I haven't. I then sanded and cut the table down to its finished size using a track saw. I kept having a problem with this track saw where if I tried to cut straight through a piece of wood with it to its finished size, it would always cut at an angle. It was set square, but it never cut square. And I soon realised that the best thing for me to fix that was to cut the slab roughly to the finished size and then cut a very small slither off the end, and that seemed to do the trick. Now that the slab had been flattened, there were still a few spots where the resin just couldn't reach, which was to be expected, but this particular spot right here was rotten pretty much all the way through. Now, I could have probably used maybe a thin resin again to harden up, but this was falling apart even just poking it with my finger. So I just decided that I was going to cut it all out with a Dremel and then fill it back in with the resin. I thought now was a good time just to coat the whole slab again in another layer of thin resin, just in case I missed any soft spots. At least I could harden everything up a little bit. And I'll tell you right now, this slab was one thirsty boy. I used quite a lot of resin. I want to say maybe half a litre, maybe even up to a litre, just constantly applying it. It was soaking all in, reapplying it every half an hour or so. I actually burnt through quite a lot of resin just doing this. After that, I then sanded the slab down to around 120 grit, just getting it all flat again, getting it all squared up, and then added a round over to all of the edges. I didn't want any sharp edges to this design. I love the curly grains and the pips of the wood, all the sort of roundness to it, and I wanted to complement this with the same sort of design, so soft rounded corners, nothing sharp, nothing jaggedy, so it somewhat accommodates the grain pattern. Look at me trying to sound like I know what I'm doing. I wanted to challenge myself with this build, so I decided that I was going to make my own wooden legs for this slab. Now, that might not mean much for some, but I've never ever made table legs myself. I've always been a sucker for just buying some pre-made metal legs, just sticking them on, but at this point in time I feel like anyone on YouTube or anyone in general can do this. It's not really that difficult. Plus, it's going to be difficult in finding a table leg set which have the insert holes exactly where I need them to be. Because of the way the slab is designed, I kind of needed to make it custom anyway. So I thought, I'll give it a go. I'm going to make it all out of sapele, and I'm going to see how I get on. I was kind of just going with the flow at this point. I didn't actually decide what design for my table legs, how they were actually going to be, but I did know how tall that they needed to be. So what I did was I ripped all the pieces up and glued them all together, so it just made 4 big blocks. I was feeling pretty optimistic at this point. The glue up was a success, all the blocks were trimming up nicely and square. It might be simple for some, but for me it was just a nice change of pace to actually design and build something and watching it slowly take shape. After deciding how I want the legs to be designed, I had to make a template so I could repeat the same shape when it comes down to shaping both of the legs. And just like the top, I wanted soft edges, I wanted soft curves, so I tried using a piece of string to make them curve symmetrical. I just couldn't get it right. I'm sure there's a way to do this somewhere online. I've definitely seen it somewhere. But in the end, I decided that I'm just going to try it free-handed instead, and it can be a future me problem if it doesn't go well. I cut the templates out using the bandsaw and did a bit of refining with the spindle sander, which was good because not only did it smooth the edges, but it also made them a lot easier to try and make more symmetrical looking. And then after that, I made a second template to mirror the original, and then I also made the middle part, which is going to act as the bridge for the legs. Making the templates was a fun process for me, but when it actually came to using them on the woodblocks themselves, it wasn't fun at all. My DIY router table can only fit a 1/4 of an inch router, and the bits just aren't long enough to cut all the way through. Even if you try and get the longest bit you can, it still leaves probably about 1/2 an inch, maybe even an inch in the middle. Doesn't matter if you do one side, you flip it upside down and you do the next, it's still the same problem. I just don't have a big enough router to cope with that at the minute. The second issue I had was down to the design of the legs. Now, because of the wood grain orientation, I was getting absolutely horrendous tear out. And it starts off really good because you're actually going down the grain, but the moment you hit that apex of that curve, you're actually starting to climb up that grain and you're ripping out the end fibers of that wood. And you can see there, it was giving me the most horrible tear out. Thirdly, when I was routing the middle parts, I forgot to add support for the ends of the wood where it starts to get that sharp point, and that also led to some nasty tear out. Yep, I bet some of you are screaming at me right now. So I did what any other woodworker would do, and that's to blame all of my tools so I can make an excuse to buy an upgrade. And that's where this bad boy comes in, along with the fattest and scariest bit you could probably think of. I definitely tick the box of all the gear and no idea. Despite some parts of tear out which I'll need to fix later, it still left a pretty good finish. One of my newest tools in the shop is a Dalmax. Now, you can't actually get these in the UK. I had this jig imported from the States and it cost me at least £220 from what I remember, and that was before paying import tax on it. In short, it's a jig which you can use to clamp and line up your joints to fit in dowels. And this was the first time using it, and I managed to get the lineups pretty much bang on perfect. I would 100% recommend it if you're looking at basic joinery, especially if you don't have a spare organ to sell for a festool domino. But what I should have done earlier was I should have used this to connect all of the pieces together, glue them down, and then template route them. And then that way the corners, the sharp corners of the middle bridge had some support so they didn't tear out. But you live and learn, I'll know that for next time. I filled in all the holes with the age-old trick of glue and sawdust, and then I took them back outside to sand it all down. If I had all the money in the world, I would invest in a 3-inch sander so I could actually get into these inner curves a lot easier. I tried to be clever and make my own super soft pad using a buffing pad double-sided tape, but that only worked good for about 30 seconds or so until the heat melted the tape and it would no longer hold the pad anymore. So in the end I just had to go back and do the old traditional hand sanding. I also sanded and routed them down with the same diameter roundover bit as I used the tabletop, and then once that was done and all cleaned up, I then started to make the base plates that were going to attach the legs to the tabletop. And this is why I chose to make my own table legs. It just allows me that creative freedom to add the insert holes wherever I wanted in that wood. And the process of building them isn't actually that difficult at all. As long as everything is equally spaced out, it really is just as easy as tracing and drilling the holes out. I recently bought this drill press from Temu as a part of one of my Temu tool videos, and I gotta say, I love this thing. It's come in pretty clutch with these legs. I know there's always that controversy over Chinese tools and is it ethical and all that jazz, but as a DIYer such as myself, I have to weigh up the costs of what I can spend on my tools. Justifying 100, 200, maybe even 300 for a top brand drill press, when this thing only costs 40, I don't know. Not all people have all the money in the world on YouTube, and I just spent 600 quid on a router table and a spindle sander, so I've got to cut corners somewhere. The legs were coming on nicely, and it was all going so well until it didn't. I was supposed to make these recessed and not cut all the way through, and I've cut all the way through it on both of them, which means that when I have my bolt, it just goes straight through. Oh, why was I not thinking properly? I might have to call it for today. That's really annoying. I don't know how I'm going to fix that. I might have to make a whole new base plate at this point. I think I've seen enough Blacktail Studio videos now where I feel pretty confident in trying out some patchwork on this. I've never done patchwork before, but I have offcut pieces from the exact same piece of wood, so at least I have a part that would actually fit the slot and match the grain. So I started chiseling it all out. It was all going to plan, and it's just not my day. It was going so well. It fit so perfect in there. Turned it over, and I don't know what I caught. I might have caught the edge of the work surface. I've chipped the whole edge of it out, and the only chunk of it I can find is this, and that is only half of what's been chipped out, and I can't find the other piece, so I can't even glue it back. Oh, I should have stopped when I said I was gonna stop. In the end, I just bought another piece of sapele, but this time I went for a more straight piece grain, which you could have argued I should have done that in the first place, given that they're going to be used for table base plates and the straight grain is going to be less prone to warping and twisting over time. After some tracing around the original holes and drilling and not routing out all the way through it, I ended up with some pretty good base plates. Now I did make the holes slightly larger, and that's just to allow for seasonal wood movement with all the humidity changes throughout the year. And then once they were finished, I then gave it a coat of Osmo Polyx satin oil. From here it's just a simple case of lining the legs up, marking them, drilling them, and adding the inserts the same way as I did with the legs. And I was starting to get really excited at this point. These were my first ever table legs. No, they're not perfect. I'm not going to try and blag that they are. There was some slight tear out that needed fixing, but in all, I couldn't be any more happy with them. To design them from scratch, learn templating, learn all the new tools, and just going through the whole process, it was fun. Metal legs will always have a spot in woodworking. I will use metal legs again, but just for this project, I think it looked good along with the black resin as well. And it's just nice to try something new for once. I'm definitely going to make more wooden legs in the future. The final stretch of this build was to sand the whole table down, going through all the grits and water popping in between, all the way up into 1000 grit. Now make no mistake here, this took at least 10 hours to sand in total. I never want to sand black resin ever again. I hated absolutely every single minute of it. It took multiple attempts at sanding it back. I actually had to go back down in the grits on a few occasions because I missed a few scratches. I tried wet sanding after 600, which seemed to make it worse, so I ended up just dry sanded up to 1000 instead, and that seemed to be the best result. I finished the table with Odie's oil super duper, and then I did one coat of the regular Odie's oil. Now Odie's oil claimed that you can use this on pieces that have been sanded up to thousands of grit, and I wanted to try and see if that claim was correct, especially if you're making like a translucent or transparent build with resin. You need that transparency with the higher grits, and if you use something like the Osmo Poly X that I use for the legs, it's just never going to adhere to it, and you're never going to get that to stick properly. A lot of people say this stuff smells really nice, and I'd 100% agree. It's like a citrusy smell. It just doesn't taste as nice as it smells. Just don't ask me how I know that.